Hello, I'm Jacques Halbronn. Here is a new lecture on French astrology. We'd like to speak today on the chart, the natal chart, or any other astrological chart. We have noticed that there is a sort of contradiction, at least in French literature. I haven't checked out completely for English-speaking literature. But in French literature, they do not explain certain things in the textbooks. On one side, they say that there is a chapter on houses, another chapter on signs, another chapter on planets, another chapter on aspects, etc., rulerships, whatever. Okay. So you read each of these chapters, and it tells you a different story, and it's a sort of different astrology, in fact. A different way of practicing astrology. Because, as André Barbeau has mentioned it in one of his books, there is a way to build the historical interpretation upon the houses. And there's another way to work with planetary significators. For instance, Ptolemy doesn't use houses. He only uses combinations of planets. But the aim to be obtained is exactly the same. It's about family, it's about marriage, it's about death, about sickness, it's about parents. So the final questions are the same, but the way to answer those questions astrologically is different. And the problem with houses is that houses have a sort of monopoly of the right questions to be asked. They carry this list of questions, house 1, house 2, house 3, etc. Firmicus Maternus, who lived in the 4th century after Christ, AD, in his 7th chapter, gives a certain number of subjects, of domains, of fields, which are of general interest that anybody can understand. As I said, parents, brothers, servants, friends, enemies, dignities, richness, etc. And for each of these points, he says, well, you can look at the houses, you can look at the combinations of planets. He gives different ways to answer the questions. Okay? And then, when the client comes and asks a question of one of those questions, which are listed, the astrologer knows what to do. Because for each question, Firmicus Maternus gives the different techniques which you can use to answer the questions. Make a synthesis of different chapters towards a single aim, which is a certain question. In France, And I take the example of André Barbeau, for instance, whom you probably know. 50 years ago, he wrote a treatise on astrology. And this treatise, de facto, is divided into two parts. The first part, as I said, is a certain number of chapters, each one concerning a different technique. And the other part is the study of the charts of about 30 French kings. And in the study of the charts of these kings, he will use the different chapters, the content of the different chapters. But he doesn't develop a chapter on questions and the different ways to answer those questions. This chapter has disappeared. So, I mean, it exists in certain treatises, it doesn't exist in this treatise. For instance, in Alan Lear, who is a well-known British astrologer, who was translated in French in 1909 and was published in 1987, mostly. And I was responsible for that re-edition. Leo and Green, they say, okay, there are general rules. They give the list of the different questions, and they give, for each question, the different ways to answer those questions. This chapter exists. And you can't find it in the treatise of Barbeau. You find the application of a chapter which doesn't exist. It's rather odd, I would say. In fact, the chart, as I said, is combining in one single plan, in one single scheme, a drawing, the planets, houses, signs, aspects, in one single view. Which gives the illusion of the impression that astrology is unique. The chart is unique and it comprehends all those techniques. So that's a proof that astrology is unique. In fact, I have a great doubt about that. And I really believe that among all those techniques, maybe none of them is properly acceptable. Okay. I would like to add certain things about Ptolemy. I don't remember I already developed that point. Anyway, no, it doesn't matter. I think that Ptolemy wanted to develop an astromancy, a divinatory astrology, based on the combination of planets. And he did not want to use houses, because houses are not based on planets. They situate, localize planets in houses, but the houses by themselves is not dependent on planets, which is also true for the zodiac. That was also the point of view of Kepler. He wanted only to hear about aspects because aspects have to do with planets. Ptolemy was more or less in the same attitude. Those two persons are, before all, astronomers. They want to reconcile astrology and astronomy by developing astrology in the direction of pure astronomy. So, even if the zodiac exists and is used by astronomers, it's not considered as a scientific object like the planets. You understand that? Even the constellations are not a scientific object because it's made of different stars, which have nothing to do together. On the contrary, these fixed stars are a real astronomical point. Combining planets and fixed stars has nothing difficult to be accepted by astronomers, except for one thing, which is, of course, that the planets belong to the solar system and the stars are much, much, much further. But from a visual point of view, which was at least the point of view of ancient astronomers, there's no problem about that. And for Ptolemy, there is no problem. Okay? So, Ptolemy, it is what my feeling about it. I am an historian and I am paid to reconstitute, to rebuild, to reinvent the genesis, the evolution of the food, of this process. Before Ptolemy, I think that, well, it's very hypothetical in details, but the main line is probably true. Before Ptolemy, there were houses. And houses were just needing moon and the sun. And there were 12 houses with as many significations. So Ptolemy wanted to pass to something else. And he decided to use the planets for that. Before him, or, well, let's say roughly like that. Probably he was not the first to do that, maybe. It's not my point for the time being. Manilius, who lived 1 century roughly before Ptolemy, were mentioning gods, but those gods were not necessarily planets. Ptolemy decided that if you have to connect planets with signs, it has to be gods with signs. Both gods have to be attributed to planets. Okay? Moreover, in a later stage of thinking, he decided that he will use all the planets instead of only one, like Moon or Sun or Saturn. I would believe that. He will combine all the planets which exist, and with all these combinations, he will be able to answer to those questions, those bloody questions, which were connected with the houses, so that he will be able to work without houses. That's exactly what Barbault felt about it, I think. He mentioned the opposition between Ptolemy, who were working on a planetary astrology, and other astrologers like Marinus, who was working with houses. So Ptolemy is responsible for having introduced in astrology planets by giving them names of gods. Gods which were used by astrologers for, but without reference to astronomy. Okay? And Firmicus Maternus, 2 centuries after Ptolemy, is responsible for having developed the idea of what we call the astrological chart, the natal chart. Because it combines what Ptolemy thought and the systems of houses at the same time. So instead of having 2 different systems which could replace each other, he took the 2 systems and he wrote a chapter on those questions that Ptolemy had exposed, different questions in different fields of life, and saying that to answer those questions you can use combination of planets, you can use planets in houses, aspects, whatever. But as I said, strangely enough, it was not followed in the 20th century, because I don't know why, but in France at least, the idea of listing, like Charles Carter did in his encyclopedia for psychological astrology in 1968, something like that, 69, which was translated in French a few years later. He didn't want to list a number of questions like that. People would just read the questions and say, oh, I will ask this question to the astrologer. And the astrologer will learn how to answer the questions. He did not want to do that. He didn't like the idea of doing that. But on the other hand, he just kept the chapter on houses with those same questions, but only for houses. In fact, I would say that the list of basic questions is the core of astrology. Astrology, divinatory astrology, more precisely, is made, created, involved to answer to, I don't know, 10, 20 questions, covering a long range of subjects. Okay? Questions. Questions without specific relationship to any technique. Okay? In particular. And at the same time, involving all the techniques which exist in astrology. What has disappeared from the French textbooks in the second part of the 20th century is precisely a disconnection the disconnection between houses and these different fields. Because houses have no monopoly upon these different fields. They can, and also, which is the cherry on the cake, the succession, the enchantment, the list of the houses, the classical list of houses, is going according to an order which is totally surrealistic. Ptolemy already said that there is to be a logical order in the study of the different subjects, the different items. He said, for instance, in book 3 or 4, that if you study children, you have to study first of all marriage. And I say that if you study I don't see why I should have a house on children in fifth house, a house on marriage, seventh house, that is after and not before the house of children. And in between we have the house of illness. It's just ridiculous. Illnesses have to exist and appear before death, for instance. That's a good couple, but not in the middle of marriage and children. This is ridiculous, etc., etc. So we have kept in France, instead of having a logical organization of the different fields in a logical order, we keep an archaic and corrupted order of the 12 houses connected with a list of subjects which have nothing to do whatsoever in terms of logical order. And this is a scandal. So French astrology from this point of view is very problematic. They have eliminated an important chapter on questions. As a matter of fact, it's interesting because they don't like our astrology, and our astrology is precisely based on questions. So maybe a connection between this and that. The idea of an astrology which would really answer to all sorts of questions through the chart has been debated, has been criticized, and the result, as usual, is a sort of mixed result which is not very satisfactory.